So in this regard, I would like to call upon our next guest speaker, who will be handling what is, still session 7, on public participation and citizen engagement. He's no stranger to us. He goes by the name of CS Senior Counsel Charles Kanjama. As I said, he's a senior counsel, an advocate of the High Court of Kenya with over 20 years of experience, a managing partner at the firm of Muma and Kanjama Advocates. And he's a seasoned litigator and legal consultant, as I believe a number of you would have noted or seen, and has held key roles within the Law Society of Kenya, including being the chair of the inaugural chair of the Nairobi branch when it was established, and the treasurer of the Council of the Law Society of Kenya. He's in various other spaces, professional spaces, including arbitration and mediation, being a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, a certified mediator, and importantly, by virtue of, that's why he's here, he's a certified secretary, an advocate of the High Court of Kenya, and an accountant as well. You may have heard of the Nairobi Legal Awards, so he chairs the trust that manages this process, and he's also, he heads up the Kenya Christian Professionals Forum, and he's the vice chair of the African Christian Professionals Forum. Now, I know too many of you, and I guess he had already asked a question in the last session. I know he's not a stranger to hopefully, I'm assuming majority of us here. He's no stranger to podiums, to guest speaking, and indeed the camera. He faces the camera quite well. CS Kanjama, I think that the first time I probably engaged with you, at least saw you engaged from afar, was probably on the television, just ahead or at the time of the 2013 general election, which was the first under the current constitution, where he was an analyst, quite prominent on our screens, taking us through what when the constitution is implemented in that regard, what it would look like, what Kenya would look like. So Mr. CS Kanjama will make a presentation to us on public participation and citizen engagement, moving from formality to impact. This is a very topical and critical conversation, especially in light of there even having been litigation on this matter, with courts pronouncing themselves on matters for which ineffective or no public participation took place or has taken place. This segues well from the previous presentations where we had the control of the budget and also the governor of Wajir County, where they also talked about the aspect of public participation, which is very key. So I wish to invite CS Senior Counsel Charles Kanjama to please come to the stage and take the podium. Let's welcome him with a very round warm of applause. And let's continue until he, right here on the podium. Thank you. Let's keep going in terms of applause. Thank you very much. Karibu.
Thank you.
All right. And we're going to do our best to try and manage time. We'll have a Q&A immediately after he's done with his presentation. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It's still morning. I'm happy that you're paying attention. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. There are many distinguished guests here, so I'll adopt the protocols that have been previously stated. All of us are important in our own way as certified secretaries and people who are interested in matters to do with the profession. As you've been told, my name is Charles Kanjama. I've been invited here to talk about public participation and citizen engagement. And this is under the theme, I want to remind us, on ethical leadership and good governance, restoring trust, renewing morals, securing the future. It's a fantastic theme. And I would like to begin by complimenting those who came up with this topic for the annual conference. The second thing I want to do before I get to my presentation is to just lay the setting and to promise you that I made the decision a year ago I run a law firm called Muma and Kanjama Advocates. I'm the managing partner there. I also serve as a certified secretary in some organizations or boards, and also as a board member in certain organizations. I've been in public sector board, professional sector, civil society, private sector, and so on. So I have tasted all over the place. And I made the decision that I will deliberately be an optimist. And I believe in the power of positive thinking. I think if you have positive thoughts about yourself, about your family, about your workplace, those positive things eventually come true. And if you have negative thoughts, the same thing tends to happen. So for those with positive thoughts, they become the future that you actually experience. If you think positive, the positive happens to you. And if you think negative, the negative tends to happen to you. But in our country, when talking about the constitution, politics, and governance, it's like we have a sport as Kenyans. And the sport is to see how pessimistic or negative sometimes we can be. Because when we look around, things seem not to be working very well. And so it's easy to be pessimistic, to focus on the politics. This has not worked. There's this disaster happening, and so on. But in my presentation, I'm going to take a positive tone, because there has been progress from 2010 when we got the Constitution of Kenya. It was a new constitution at the time. And this year, 2015, will be the 15th anniversary of the Constitution. So we'll be seeing what was the plan of the framers of the Constitution. How far have we gone? What has been articulated by the various organs and structures of government as the requirements of public participation, and how far have we engaged in realizing the promise of civic engagement or citizen engagement and public participation. All of us have ideas about public participation, but that's what we're going to be looking at. And the next thing I would like to say as I lay the foundation for the presentation is that last year we were all gripped to the screens as we were following the impeachment of the Deputy President of the Republic of Kenya, Honorable Rigathi Gachagua, or as is popularly known, Rigiji. And this is an example of public participation. When the proceedings were going on in the National Assembly and in the Senate, it was live proceedings. We were all following the proceedings. They went to court. It was live. We were participating. The media were reporting about it. And both at the National Assembly and more particularly in the Senate, they had to even go to the counties to seek views from Kenyans. Of course, there was an element of politics. There was some chaos in some places. A report was prepared about the impeachment views of Kenyans on the impeachment of the Deputy President. And eventually, unfortunately for him, he got impeached. But the whole drama was not just something that was happening by elite institutions and in an elite setting, but the Kenyans themselves were involved in the process. The various organs and arms of government were involved. The judiciary, the executive, the legislature. There were other agencies like IBC sent a letter at some point in time. So this is something that before 2010, we would not have contemplated. Of course, there were gaps, and the lawyers who went to court after Rigiji was voted out by the Senate, the impeachment, they argued that there were various shortcomings to the public participation process. The judges gave them a hearing. The judges did not agree with them. But this is what public participation is all about. Sometimes it's orderly. Sometimes it's a bit more chaotic, a bit more messy. But that is what is expected of this new democratic approach that we have adopted under the new constitution. I have some slides, and I'm hoping that they will be put up on the screen. There's not a... okay, very well. So in this presentation, I just want to very quickly start by saying what I understand ethical leadership to be: a form of leadership based on strong moral principles and universal values, such as integrity, transparency, and respect for others. If there's no ethical leadership, all these structures and processes in the Constitution will come to naught. One of the Federalist papers that was written in the prelude to the independence of the United States of America, or in the prelude to the American Constitution, which they promulgated in 1787, was discussing this fundamental question: that if you have a system of democracy, which is ruled by the majority or ruled by the people, that is what democracy means, and the people are not virtuous, the people are not informed, can democracy survive? And this particular Federalist paper is attributed to Thomas Jefferson, and I think he concluded, according to him, more than 240 years ago, that for democracy to survive, you need virtuous citizens, you need citizens who are informed and who can apply pressure from the bottom up, but the true bottom up, to their leaders to be accountable. And so ethical leadership is the corollary of virtuous citizenship. That if the citizens are ethical, are virtuous, and are responsible and involved, they will ensure that their leaders also have strong moral principles, universal values such as integrity, transparency, and respect for others. So it's like the two of them are different faces of the same coin. And good governance is therefore a process whereby public institutions conduct public affairs, manage public resources, and guarantee the realization of human rights. The courts in Kenya have had to interpret what is good governance, because good governance is a phrase that appears in Article 10 of the Constitution. And it's not easy to get a definition. Even these are just working definitions, because there are various elements and various perspectives of what good governance is. But for our courts, they focus on the question of public institutions, but it also applies to private institutions, conduct affairs, manage resources, and guarantee human rights. And this working definition talks about in a manner essentially free of abuse and corruption, and taking into account the rule of law. And then public participation, which is what I'm meant to talk about, has been defined by the International Association for Public Participation. It's another phrase that appears frequently in the Constitution and increasingly in our legal instruments, in our statutes. The Constitution does not define public participation. In fact, the first appearance of public participation uses a different phrasing. Article 10 does not say public participation. It says participation of the people, or participation by the people. So I looked for the definition of the International Association for Public Participation, which is the involvement of those affected by a decision in the decision-making process. Public participation encompasses a range of public involvement, from simply informing people about what Parliament is doing to delegating decisions to the public. I was in a Supreme Court case last year. I was acting for the Law Society of Kenya, and this particular case involved the Finance Bill of 2023. The Finance Bill of 2023 was struck down by the High Court, some provisions, and then all the provisions by the Court of Appeal. So we went to the Supreme Court because the National Treasury filed an appeal, and they were telling the Supreme Court that the Court of Appeal took the definition of public participation too far. Because the Court of Appeal said that each of the provisions of the law, there were comments from Kenyans. And Parliament was required to give a reason why they were accepting or rejecting each view. And the Supreme Court felt that at least the questions they were asking during the time we were addressing them, that this is extending the scope of public participation beyond what was anticipated by the Constitution. And I remember the judges asking me a question, Mr. Kanjama, please tell us how you reconcile the recent decision of the Court of Appeal with our judgment in the BAT case. We are going to see what the Supreme Court said in the BAT case. So even the courts themselves, in a series of decisions over the last 10 years, have been increasingly articulating the content of public participation. And the final recommendation of the Supreme Court is that Parliament needs to pass a more concretized public participation bill that guides public officers, public organs, and state organs on the measure of public participation. Before going further, I would like to just ask a question. How many of us here, by show of hands, are from the private sector? Private sector. By show of hands. Private sector means you are not working for government as your day-to-day job. So, and then how many of us, by show of hands, are in the public sector? So the majority in the room are in the public sector. But even when you're in the public sector, you tend to have a side job. You're also private sector. You do some things in the private sector. True or false? True. And for those of us in the private sector, sometimes we have engagement also in the public sector. The assumption is that public participation, because the first word is public, only relates to public sector engagement. And that is not correct. Even in the private sector, there are issues of public participation. For example, in the area of land use, you are a contractor, you want to put up a development. These are private sector projects. And many of them, the question of, did you do public participation when you are setting up your project, comes into play. So in the land court, the issue of public participation is affecting private sector developments. In the employment court, the question of, I wanted to lay off some of my workers, redundancy. Did you call them into a town hall to discuss with them why you want to lay off some of them? What is the formula you're going to use? This is private sector as well as public sector. So public participation is not only an imperative in the public sector. So in the Constitution, the first article talks about all sovereign power belonging to the people of Kenya, which they can exercise directly or through representatives. And this is the true, you could say, root of the public participation imperative. And then you have Article 10 on the national values and principles of government. And it says under Article 10 that they apply to every person, not just to public officers, but to every person whenever any of them interprets the law, interprets or applies the Constitution or public policy. So all of us are required to take into account this a public participation imperative. Then you have other provisions like Article 33 on freedom of expression and 34 on the media. Article 35 has actually given rise to an act of parliament, and you're aware of it even in the public sector, the Access to Information Act, and it is the Commission on Administrative Justice, or the Ombudsman, who is the enforcer or administrator of the requirement for access to information. And that means that unlike in the old days when information held in public hands was treated as official secrets by default, the default requirement under the Constitution of Kenya is give information to those who are affected by the decision-making process. And if the information is not received within the timelines indicated in the Access to Information Act, like 21 days, then the citizen can appeal to the Commission on Administrative Justice. So that is also part of public participation. You cannot have effective public participation even under the draft bill that is in Parliament or under the principles that the court has established if those who are being asked to give information are not informed. Those who are being asked to participate are not informed about the matter in issue. Then you have the various provisions in regard to the environment, the obligation to have public participation in management, protection, and conservation of the environment, in matters to do with parliament, right to petition parliament, in matters to do with judicial authority. In devolution, Article 174 of the Constitution talks of public participation as one of the principles of devolution. Then Article 184 talks about national legislation on urban areas and cities, which would ensure participation by the residents in that area. And we have an Urban Areas and Cities Act, as you are very well aware, in county assemblies, in public finance, the question of public participation comes in, and this was part of what was discussed in the finance bill litigation. And then we have several laws. Before we go to the laws, we have in the budgeting process, in public service, the need for public participation, and in the functions and powers of the county assembly. So we have several laws that expressly talk about participation of the people, like the Public Finance Management Act, the County Government Act, the Public Participation Bill, which is available online, and you can look at it. When I reviewed this bill, I don't think the bill meets the test or the expectation of the Supreme Court. It's a very general bill. The Supreme Court wants there to be more detail about timelines for public participation, mechanisms for securing public participation. But the bill at least recommends that every public agency develop a public participation policy and come up with those timelines and determine what are the measures that are used for public participation. Is it the media? Is it newspaper? Is it technology? There has been a concern by members of parliament and also in some public organs that the cost of public participation is spiraling out of control. And if public participation has to be done, like in the case of our former Deputy President Rigiji, then it will be unsustainable. You cannot call a baraza in all 47 counties or all 290 constituencies anytime you need to have a policy change. I have also been involved in some cases in the High Court where the question is whether a specific policy, and government ministries are making policy decisions all the time, did this specific policy comply with the requirement of public participation? So in one of these cases that I'm handling, the ministry said, no, we have our list of stakeholders, maybe the Ministry of Health. We know who they are. We wrote to them. We wrote to the Council of Governors. We wrote to the health sector players, and we organized a few conferences and a few meetings, and they even show the process. But there are some people who are not aware of the policy-making process. And so they've come to court, they are saying, no, this process was not sufficiently inclusive. And the High Court has struck down very many policies on the basis of public participation. It's become the new weapon for people who don't like the outcome of public engagement to challenge public participation. Even some of the original impeachments, like of Martin Wambora of Embu County, they collapsed. Why? Because of the question of public participation. The court struck down the outcome of those processes. So the issue is, how do we ensure that the public participation meets the expectation of the Constitution? You call it the constitutional test, the statutory or legal test, while at the same time not causing inefficiency in the public administration process. And if it is in the private sector, how can public participation be incorporated efficiently in the processes, even in the private sector, without being too costly, without being too time-consuming? So in the Urban Areas and Cities Act, there's an expectation for public participation of the residents in decision-making. In the Intergovernmental Relations Act, the same. In intergovernmental relations, and so on. So I'm not going to go through various other statutes because I think I have touched on some of the important ones. This is the most important decision of the Supreme Court on public participation. It's the BAT case, British American Tobacco. Of course, the other important decision is the one on the Finance Bill of 2023. And in this BAT case, the Supreme Court established what it considered the principles of public participation. And it defined the essence of public participation in relation to legislation, because public participation does not only apply to legislation, but in relation to legislation is to ensure that is imbued with public interest and is democratically scrutinized. And the Supreme Court quoted from a South African decision, which is like the landmark authority that has influenced the Supreme Court of Kenya, the Court of Appeal of Kenya, and the High Court. The case of Doctors for Life International versus Speaker of the National Assembly and others. This was a case where the South African Supreme Court was dealing with a challenge to some laws on issues of abortion and contraception that had been passed in South Africa. And the challenge to those laws was that there wasn't sufficient public participation. And so the South African court said that the basic idea of public participation is that it is a means of ensuring that legislation is both informed and democratically accountable. Participation by the public on a continuous basis provides vitality to the functioning of representative democracy, and so on. And then there's also the case of Kenya Alliance of Resident Associations, where again the Supreme Court said that in the lawmaking process, it's not enough to just submit the initial bill to the public. When there are amendments, when there are changes in the lawmaking process, are those changes also submitted to the public? And this was an issue in the finance bill. And the question was, when you go to public participation and you are discussing maybe the question of land use, and maybe you want to build, I don't know, a mosque, a church, a religious place of worship. And in the course of public participation, someone tells you, why don't you also do a kindergarten or an ECD institution and say, wow, that's a good idea. So then the outcome of the public participation is you decide to put up the religious house and the kindergarten. But then there were many other people who did not know about the suggestion of putting up the kindergarten, because when you sent the notice, you said we are doing public participation for the mosque or for the church. So what do? Can you just take any suggestion in the public participation, even though it introduces a change in the character of the initial proposal, a material change in the character of the initial proposal? And the Supreme Court, referring to the case of Doctors for Life, said that no, if there is a material change to the character of the initial proposal, then it should be subjected to further public participation. And when this argument was now used in the Finance Bill 2023 case, the Supreme Court walked back a bit on their previous principle. And they said that all the amendments that were introduced into the Finance Bill of 2023 came from public participation. And even though some of them may have changed the character of the original proposal, it was not, according to them, significant enough to strike down the Finance Bill. Apologies for those of you who are not lawyers. I'm giving this as simply as I can to try and summarize the fact that in public participation, from the moment you begin to the moment you end, the proposal to the public may be undergoing change. And the question is, when do you need to give notification to the public about a change in the proposal in the course of the public participation? If somebody had been informed about the original proposal, maybe you put an advert in the newspaper, maybe you uploaded it on the website of this organization, and then there's been a change in the character, do you assume that the original notification was sufficient or not? That is one of the issues. And then we also know that one of the other issues on public participation is the extent. How do you do the public participation? Some laws give you guidance. There is a loss of the deed file in the Ministry of Lands, and you want to reconstruct the title. You are told, put a gazette, advertisement in the Kenya Gazette, and an advertisement in a newspaper of national circulation. But you are not told how the advertisement will be. So many times the advertisement in the newspaper is in the classifieds. It's one of those ones where you have 4 columns or 5. Remember, in one case, the lawyer actually went to, there's this newspaper that you don't even buy. If you wake up early in the roads, you are given, what is it called? People Daily. So they put the advert in People Daily. And when the other side was saying, no, we never saw the advert, they were able to give an affidavit of an advert, a small advert in the People Daily. And so these are issues that sometimes come up. What was the nature of the advertisement to the public? Was it enough to put an advert in your website? How many people visit the website? So Parliament, for example, has a very good structure whereby all the bills are in the parliamentary website. There is a tracker telling you this bill is in the first reading, this one is in the second reading, this one is in the committee stage. How adequate is the notice that is put in the website of an institution? Do people know about it? Is it hidden so that you go to the website, actually the advert is there, but you need to almost be an expert and spend 10 to 20 minutes browsing through the website to find the advert? Was there a link on the home page? Or it was on one of the pages? You went to adverts, and then after adverts under vacancies, there is a link to that particular advertisement. So these are some of the issues that the court would consider if there is a contestation as to the nature of public participation that has been done. And then one of the other very high-profile cases on public participation involved the Mui coal basin. There was this issue of a proposal to put up some coal mines. And of course, anything that involves land use or environment, public participation is very important. And the court noted that a public participation program must show intentional inclusivity and diversity. If you can show that there seems to be some cosmetic attempt at public participation, but there is no clarity about intentional inclusivity, that some bona fide stakeholders have been kept out, then that public participation would be deemed to have failed the test. And the public official or government agency must take into account the subsidiarity principle, that those most affected by a policy, legislation, or action must have a bigger say in that policy. This tends to happen with environmental impact assessments. Anytime something needs to be done, a development, they are required to put up, to do a report. So they want to put up a big structure, and they are meant to ensure that the neighbors, the immediate neighbors in the vicinity are aware. And sometimes we've had cases at the tribunal of NEMA or in the court where there is a fantastically done report showing how they did public participation, but the immediate neighbors were not aware that this project was about to begin until after the process is over. And they actually show you a photo that they put a notice outside, because they have to also put a physical notice in the premises. And sometimes I don't know whether they put the notice, they take the photo, and then they pull down the notice, because in the affidavit the notice is there, but the people around are saying, no, I did not see. I used to pass by this road every day. So those are examples of people who are trying to do cosmetic public participation without them being authentic. So I think I've spoken enough about public participation. Some of the elements that the courts have talked about. I'm going to go very quickly now because I think time is not with us. How do we overcome the challenges in public participation? What are the challenges? They include the issue of cost, time, accessibility, lack of trust, the need for diversity, the question of elite capture. I think I've talked about that, where you always have a few people in the know doing the participation, while the rest of the common man or woman is not very involved. Even when the county assemblies are asking for participation for the county budget process, there are few people who are aware, and the rest don't seem to be aware. Sometimes it might be the MP who gets some of their supporters to show up in the hall and have the discussion for county budget process or policy process. So this risk of elite capture is a major risk. The lack of national legislation, which we've discussed, and the issue of political competition. In the case of Rigiji, the Parliament concluded that public participation involves some form of tallying of like votes. How many people in this constituency support the impeachment of Rigiji? How many do not? And this is an innovation of Parliament, because public participation, there's nowhere it says you have to tally the votes. But Parliament realized that if they don't do this, their outcome might be struck down. So is this what public participation is, just asking people to vote one way or the other? Those are questions that still remain alive. But political competition does affect the character of public participation. Expectation of compensation for participation, especially for public barazas. There are those people who expect to be mobilized. Give me some allowance. Start by giving me food, give me refreshment, give me some money for having come here, some transport. So what do you do when you're a public agency and you don't have adequate budget for this kind of compensation? And then the fact that people are called to participate and they've not been given civic education. So, a year and a half ago, I was appointed into a presidential task force to deal with issues of religious organizations. This was in the aftermath of Shakahola. And when we met in one of our first meetings, we decided, okay, we have to visit all 47 counties, part of public participation. We were able, with the assistance of experts, to look at our terms of reference and kuchambua, to kind of like go through them and understand what they meant. So when we would go for the town halls and you'd have a big group like this one, there were religious leaders, there were members of the community, we couldn't just arrive and start by asking them, give us your views. We had to spend some minutes explaining to them what are our terms of reference, what kind of views do we want. And we very quickly realized after going to the first or two counties that doing the civic education on the day of the public participation was not adequate. You needed to prepare the people in advance. Of course, on the day of public participation, you have to do some civic education. But in advance, those who are mobilizing the people to come, whether it is the county commissioners or the county governors or whoever, can they communicate to them in summary what is the issue that you are dealing with? So I'm telling you things that you're all aware of about civic education, the dynamics of civic education, where, when do you do it before the public participation or during the public participation. And then manipulation of public participation forums by diverse interests. How do you overcome the challenges of public participation? I was involved in a governance audit not too long ago, and this particular institution is a financial institution that is also a public institution. So as a financial institution, they are under Central Bank of Kenya, and they have a lot of standards that they need to comply with and requirements in various governance aspects. At the same time, they are a public institution. There's the Mwongozo Code, there are various other government institutions with expectations, performance contracting. And so the first challenge is even to understand who are all our stakeholders. And unfortunately, without a very well done stakeholder mapping, we cannot do effective public participation. And so the first requirement for effective public participation is to demonstrate that you've done stakeholder mapping. You understand all the stakeholders, the different groups of stakeholders, the identities of the more important stakeholders, and so on. What is the threshold for public participation? Is there a percentage of people who should participate? Should you visit a certain geographical region? Is there a digital reach? And the requirements are going to become more particularized as we proceed with the coming years, the emphasis on participatory governance. The ability to contextualize public participation for the issue that we are dealing with, funding of public participation. Public agencies, I think, will need to ensure that their normal budgeting, their annual budgeting cycle includes a regular kind of like budget appropriation for public participation. And there needs to be clarity about the kind of returns or the kind of data that will be received by the board to justify or to support the public participation exercises that have been undertaken. And then public participation to be simplified for the needs of the different people there. And so I want to talk about civic education or importance of civic education in public participation. I think the public agency that is best advanced or developed in the issue of civic education is the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. And you do know, if you've participated in their processes beyond voting, that they produce handbooks, they have civic education forums, they have partnerships with even donors who come and support them in public participation. They produce simplified handbook for Mwananchi. They produce some which are more elaborate for observers. They do training forums, and it is all within their budget. We don't all have to reach the standard of IBC, but all of us should try at least to emulate some of what they are doing, so that there can be informed decision making, increased participation, accountability, and reduction of misinformation. We have been talking recently about ESG as a new area of sustainability, environmental, social, and governance. And yesterday, one of the speakers, I think, was saying that even when we focus on ESG, we have to ensure that we are not just driving an agenda that has come from Europe or from the West, but our ESG or sustainability reporting takes into account our local context and needs. So one of the things I would recommend personally is that in this sustainability reporting, we include an aspect on public participation. Probably it would appear under the E, under the S, and under the G. Public participation. What are our metrics? What are the measurements for effective public participation in the actions that we take that have an impact on the public? And even for private institutions, if you're an institution like Safaricom in the telco sector, or a financial institution like a bank, insurance company, a trading institution, what are the aspects of my business that affect the members of the public? In governance, we call it stakeholder engagement. That stakeholder engagement involves public participation. So challenges facing civic education in Kenya are similar to those facing general public participation: poor coordination, weak coordination, inadequate competencies, underfunding of civic education, language barriers, and failure to use adequate ICT technology. There are also challenges of inclusivity, use of media, quality of civic education, and so on. What are the potential benefits for online public engagement? The last thing I was meant to talk about was the use of technology. We are hearing a lot about artificial intelligence. The courts have made it clear that public participation does not have to be physical and in person in all kinds of cases. There are some cases where you need to have physical and in person, but this can be mixed with use of technology. For example, Parliament, their use of internet, their use of virtual technologies has been upheld in several cases by the courts. And so online public engagement, we all remember when President William Ruto went to X to engage the Gen Zs on various issues touching on finance and budgeting. We also remember when he had a session that was hybrid, partly physical and partly virtual, and broadcasts with the university students about the new funding model. So this is an example of public participation that is taking into account technology. And of course, if you have those kind of public participation methods, that works very well. The government has been pushing a lot on e-citizen and e-government platforms, social media, mobile-based platforms. The way our banks keep telling us that they are closed, tomorrow is a public holiday. This is something that public sector organizations can use. And we do know, for those of us who are farmers, that every so often we receive a message from the Ministry of Agriculture telling us there are so many bags of fertilizer available, you can come for your bags, and so on. That is also part of public participation. So my time is virtually over, and I want to say thank you for listening to me very keenly.
Let's give it up for CS SC Charles Kanjama. Thank you very, very much.